But it was only when Next question. All right here. Yes.
First, thank you so much for your book and for coming to talk to us. My question is, I hope, a simple question, but just wanted to understand better who is your audience for this book, for what you wrote, and what other groups do you hope to kind of speak in front of? Because you're in DC, you're in the heartland of policy makers, policy decision makers. Do you plan to bring this to, for example, the Hill in Congress and kind of present this? I mean, I'm somebody that's very DC minded. This would be something great, a parallel to draw to the Hill, because I do think that a lot of people do not understand the parallels between Palestine and Kashmir, for example, or Israel, India as a state. So just curious to know who your audience was initially when you wrote this, and if that's changed, and curious to hear your thoughts.
I'm trying to avoid thinking and then finding my answer while I'm talking. I'm trying to keep it short. So I feel as if that I'm not the one that has invented this story. Who has first seen these linkages. Kashmiris have seen these linkages for a long time. And Indian Muslims have also seen this. Indian Christians also see some of these connections. I don't mean necessarily India-Israel connections, but the kind of the fascism and the authoritarianism that's seeping into the community, and they're trying to make sense of it. So why I'm saying that is that I'm hoping that the book and the sort of so-called, what Sana calls scholarship of the book, in the book, helps a lot of these communities, and some of these activists in these communities, with a vocabulary regarding what the hell is going on, basically. That's my first hope. So I'm hoping that the book reaches people who are interested in the topic, and I'm trying to make an argument to the communities. Because, we talk about self-hating, self-hating member of society, or Islamophobia, this ingrained Islamophobia. Muslims in India are also Islamophobic to themselves. They are confused about what's happening. And so this kind of bringing these facts and these issues to them, hoping to see that there's a project unfolding against you. The second thing is that your question about here in the US, I'm hoping that, I prioritize having talks with community organizations more than anything else. I've only had 2 talks at a bookstore. Most of the bookstores are not interested anyway in this topic. They're interested in Michelle Obama's book. And so I couldn't compete. But so I've been trying to have these meetings with community members in which, even if it's small, but they get the text and we discuss it and they can maybe use it for something. The third thing, or the third element to this answer is that I think I am interested. I don't know if I should do it, but if someone wants to take it to the Hill and have a chat to someone there, sure. And if they want to invite me, I'll come. I'll come for a free lunch. But I am very skeptical of the idea that they don't know what's going on. They know what's going on. In all of the tragedies of the past, people knew what was going on. When you talk about Palestine, people knew what was happening during the Holocaust. The US and England didn't want to accept Jewish refugees. They sent them to Palestine. Right? You talk about Rwanda, the UN knew what was going on in Rwanda, but they picked them up and sent them home. Right? Likewise, there's so many other things we can talk about. People know, and the US State Department knows. Ro Khanna, I'm sorry if your staff is here, but Ro Khanna knows. But the Indian lobby has become so strong, they're threatening these guys. This is the issue. So yes, we can take it to them and we can talk about it, but I don't think we should pretend people don't know. I think they know. I think the major thing here is the point about changing the discourse. It comes to Sana's point, very important point, and that is the idea of what India stands for in our imagination. We think about the cuisine, we think about yoga, we think about Bollywood, we think about Shah Rukh Khan. Even I like Shah Rukh Khan, right? But this is what you're battling against. You're not thinking about the Chinese boogeyman when it comes to India. You're thinking about a friendly Indian who's like, who's Gandhi. I mean, literally, this is a huge issue. The soft power of India has been built up for years. Go to many parts of the African continent, and which I reported for Al Jazeera for many years. And you tell them that you're South African, the first thing is Mandela, which is also our biggest export. No matter what South Africa does, it's 21 anymore, right? Being a hegemon and all of that on the continent. And the second thing, you talk about India, and you talk about Bollywood. That's it. So I think I'm hoping that, I don't know, like the story goes into another place in terms of discourse. We need to shake up the discourse. And then discourse perhaps moves into people power if we believe in that.
I have a comment with the question. Well, the U.S. hegemony is going down. So also before the U.S. hegemony going down, we had BRICS, the countries Brazil, India, South Africa, and China, which is 2 of them you are involved. 2 countries. And I can tell, yes, after the Soviet collapse of Soviet Union, India shifted to the West, and probably through have more relationship with Israel and lobbyists, because I can see their policy even towards the Middle East and Iran, right? At the same time, we are criticizing Muslim. Look at the Emirates, Saudis, which is Abraham Accord. They are more willing, more than even India, to go have a relationship with Israel openly. Of course, right now it's shifting again because they see the power in the world is shifting. So, and I think India realizing too that the power is shifting, because you can see it around the world that, like against Russia, they didn't join the sanction against Russia. And also, I know there is a lot of internal problem with in India, but I have really problem when we're talking about Kashmir to put Kashmir as occupied, because after World War I, after World War II, the countries border shift, even in Europe, in Middle East, lots of countries, and Pakistan came through colonization, in my opinion, which is dividing the India. So the occupation, in Kashmir, I have fully respected demand and the freedom, whatever they wanted in Kashmir. But as it considered occupied, the same thing happening, like in my country, they said, Kurdish people, we are together for more than 6,000-7,000 years, is occupied. Or Azerbaijan is occupied. Balochistan in Iran, they want to find the oil in Balochistan, Pakistan, they want to make an independent country, now it's occupied. And all of these promoted by colonization, power, divide and conquer. So I'm really against any partition of any countries. We have to fight for our rights with those dictatorships in the powers, but at the same time, I think we have to look at the world right now, because lots of power emerging. India is one of them, and they are standing, like they said, they don't want it for the trade, commerce trade. They are willing to get not dollar.
Thank you so much for your comment. I just want to make sure thank you so much. I just want to make sure we have enough time for everybody to get their questions in.
just gonna make one quick comment. I think there was a lot of layers to what you just said, but I do want to say, internationally, under international law, Kashmir may not be recognized as occupied, but being the most, I don't know what else you call a region which has a thriving resistance and liberation movement that precedes any even idea of partition and all of that. And also requires
over 700,000 troops to keep the people in line if it's not occupied. So I do want to push back against that particular idea. I think it's very simplistic to say that it is that Kashmiri aspiration, that what the violence, the ethnic cleansing that Kashmiri Muslims especially have faced for not just 7 decades, but for over 100 years, is just still thinking or something of that. So I do want to at least address that, but thank you for your comment otherwise.
In mainstream U.S. media, like New York Times or Washington Post. What about, and I've not read your book, so does your book talk about this, or what are your thoughts on other key players in South Asia, like Pakistan, who do not recognize Israel, and that as a consequence of like their portrayal or their sort of narrative in the mainstream media, and as a byproduct, their acceptance globally?
Can you repeat just the last part of your question?
Like, for key players that in South Asia, like Pakistan, that do not recognize Israel, what impact does that have on their portrayal or the narrative in mainstream U.S. media for countries like those that do not have ties with Israel?
I don't deal with how I don't deal with that question, but how Pakistan's refusal to recognize Israel impacts their coverage or the coverage on them. But we can make a lot of assumptions about how how they are impacted, and we don't have to actually go down that route completely. We don't have to actually even get there. We can just focus on just the power of India in terms of, any story from South Asia is India-centric, right? And so, meaning that the hegemon in the region is India. And so if your foreign policy is closer to India, then your narrative in the US press or the US mainstream press is going to be closer to your ally. And so that means that coverage of Pakistan is obviously going to be very slanted. And so, yeah, I think that's all I can say about it.
I'll just quickly also say that I think when it comes to media coverage of Pakistan, I'm actually working on an episode for my series on this, so very relevant. But I will say that I don't think that particular question of Pakistan's position on Israel plays much of a role in how traditionally U.S. news media for the last 7 decades has engaged with Pakistan, Pakistanis, Islam in Pakistan, etc. It is something that comes out once in a while. Like there's an interesting story, like, but generally speaking, I don't think it plays as big of a role. I think Pakistan, because of the position that it occupies in the region, and it's kind of like, I would say like probably a frustrating ally for the United States, or one of maybe necessity of some sort. But I think other factors play far more into what we've seen as like the dominating tropes about how Pakistan and Pakistanis are portrayed in U.S. news media in popular culture versus India itself, versus Israel itself. Although I will say that yes, the relation, like I would say more India itself, and I'm not talking about like Indians, but even just the idea of India itself probably plays a bigger role in the position that Pakistan even takes on in an American imagination in the narratives that we see around it.
I do think, sorry, and I was just going to say, I do think sometimes when there are, for example, protests in support of Palestinian rights, for example, if Gaza is being bombed or something all over the Muslim world, those images get projected completely out of context. and decentering what's actually happening, what the people are reacting to, and instead focusing on these images in a way to like fear monger.
Yeah.
And this is just a really small anecdote, but there was a documentary that PBS Frontline made about COVID in Yemen. And within the first, I think, 4 minutes, they're talking about giving just background on who the Houthis are. And they say, no, the Houthis are backed by Iran. And you see completely out of context a Houthi or Yemeni protest with an Israeli flag being burned. Like, what does that have to do with COVID in Yemen? But you see sometimes Israel being centered and sort of opposition to Israel being centered in a way that is completely decontextualized. And that also makes a lot of assumptions and sort of playing on preconceptions.
The argument is not about the U.S. The argument is about what it means for people around the world. So if people around the world want to live lives of dignity and in freedom and not be squashed, they've got to pay attention to these new alliances taking place. That's the idea. So what people on the Hill do about it, or what the US wants to do about it, I don't really care. The point is, what do people want from this? And that's why I'm emphasizing the point about the level of discourse here, the issue of discourse. The thing is that, you know, one of the speakers from the audience spoke about, you know, the BRICS. I mean, there's a huge power shift taking place, and it's true, it's real, and the US is going to do what it wants to do, and it always will do what it wants to do, to survive and to thrive in terms of its military-industrial complex, to make it as large and as sustainable as possible. But there are real people being squashed by it, and there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation about why this is taking place. And a simple example with regards to, you know, this Haifa port thing, and I told you I'm slightly obsessed with it, is that, you know, it brings in the point that, you know, this is about internationalizing an occupation. You look at Haifa port, it'll become a spot in which whatever happens in Palestine, whether there's a new intifada, whether Israelis are on the streets fighting for their judicial rights that will secure their own privileges, whatever is happening, that port is going to continue working like clockwork. These millionaires and billionaires are going to just let their goods move from one end to the other end of the world. It'll go via this port, and nothing will impact it. Now, do we want to live in a world like that? And the internationalization of the occupation means that you won't know who to blame in the end. Everyone is invested in it. The US is just one player, and that's the point here. It's the UAE, Israel, and India joining up as a West Asian bloc with the guidance of the US in opposition to China, and also with regards to in cementing Israel's place in the Middle East and the world. And what will happen is that ultimately all those weapons that are being built in India are not going to be used by Indians. They're going to be sent to the African continent, where Israelis are already there, right? And they're going to go to other countries on the African continent, where those countries who didn't have a good relationship with Israel will now get those arms via the friendly nation of India, whom they have Gandhi and Nehru, who they remember. It's a very serious thing. Maybe we don't fully understand that soft power that India has, but that's the implication of that. So whether you want to call it a moral argument, a strategic argument, whatever it is, the point is that people need to come to terms with what is coming. And that's it. Please repeat that.
Yes. So
Yeah.
you touched on caste quite a bit, and I'm wondering if you observed any manifestation of sort of diaspora alliance within the diaspora manifesting itself in ways to recognize caste. Seattle, California, where else?
To be honest, I don't fully understand the question, honestly. I don't fully. I'm not hearing everything.
Oh, there's a movement to sort of talk
To
about
acknowledge,
caste,
yeah,
to
yeah,
acknowledge
yeah.
caste discrimination.
And
So she's saying, you talked about like how a lot of the Hindutva, Hindu national supporters are upper caste.
Mhm.
Is there some kind of, did you see any like crossover between the two movements?
crossover between those who are
Hindu nationalists
and who?
um,
Crossover between whom?
Are
I'm so
you
sorry.
talking specifically about, for instance, that we've seen as an example in Silicon Valley, we've seen people who have brought up the issue of caste discrimination. So, for instance, talking about how CEOs and managers of Indian origin you're talking about that, right? That okay? We're just trying to figure out like which exactly. So yeah. So the question is exactly what like.
So we've seen sort of any like the Hindu nationalists in the diaspora in the U.S. and Zionists in the U.S. sort of like teaming up to kind of push back against those who
Okay,
bring
okay,
up
sorry,
caste
sorry,
discrimination.
sorry.
Sorry. You're good. You're good. No need to apologize.
Okay, so I can't say that I've seen Hindu nationalists aligning with Zionists with regards to undermining those efforts to bring up caste and to label caste as racist and all of that, or to classify it properly. However, we know that Hindu nationalists have been pushing back regarding that. We also know that Hindu nationalists have been working on other issues with regards to the branding of India, right? So possibly caste is part of that. It's a very good question, actually. That's why you once 3 steps ahead of me here. But possibly that is part of the package that they're working with together. Yeah, absolutely. I think I should look into that.
If I'm not mistaken as well, when it came to the protests in particular that happened at Google, and someone can fact check me like live, but there was also suppression of those protests from Google employees, of Google employees who were talking about how, for those of you who don't know, there were these series of protests that took place. There's also a movement as well, which highlights that, everyone celebrates, right? Like, oh, Indian Americans are CEOs across all these major tech companies and so on and so forth. And what a small but really powerful group of Indian Americans also brought up is that there is caste discrimination in terms of who is allowed ultimately to not just reach like the highest positions, but then who's brought up as well, right? And how caste plays a fundamental role in that. And if I remember correctly, there were these protests, just like there were protests about like Google's relationship with Israel, they were suppressed as well. And I think people were also let go through like other means, but yeah, unfortunately it was suppressed. And that's what happens also, obviously, when you have people who hold positions of power, not within just like these massive amongst these massive platforms, but also, in U.S. news media, that's something we didn't really get to talk about as much as well. But in terms of how does that caste discrimination also come out in news coverage as well? So
Actually, I might change my mind on this answer, right? So what I want to say is that it's possibly that they are not working that hard either on it, because when we talk about discrimination, racial discrimination, Juneteenth, right? In the end, what does that mean also? They can just make these statements or they can pass a resolution, but it doesn't necessarily mean that something's actually going to change or there's actually going to be some accountability, or it's just like it's the identity and it's also become a commodified thing as well, to just say, okay, we're buying into caste as a label that we need to consider this caste discrimination taking place. So it's possible that they would allow it to happen as well, because it's maybe easy. It's not going to be materially different, It's not like talking about self-determination of someone or talking about people's rights in terms of in a declining environment, in terms of people losing their citizenship, right? And that's harder to talk about. But I'm not saying that caste is not important. I mean, I hope you understand what I mean.
I think we have time for one more question.
Do we? We do now.
Who's the lucky person?
Okay. Oh, Sabrina, go for it.
So I wanted to ask about India's presence in Africa. So I'm just African, and I want to know if you felt like India's presence was like quasi-colonization or settlements would be similar, especially in countries like Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, etc.
So India is one of several countries that are entering the African continent for this new scramble that's taking place. It's a very, very serious thing that's taking place. To be very honest with you, the original book that I was working on was about this new scramble on the African continent, looking at Turkey, looking at Russia. India was going to be one of them, but I was focusing on like the US and Israel and China. So the Indian government is spending a lot of money in several parts of the continent in trying to, do what the US AID does, what Israel does with Mashav as well. They go in and create some kind of partnerships when it comes to agriculture. And what they do is that they will get some land back in terms of like, give some money and get land and use that land for agriculture. You're getting food back to India. So when it comes to established communities on the continent, whether it's Indian communities, so-called people of Indian origin, whether it is South Africa, whether it is Kenya, whether it is Tanzania, you're seeing a lot more tension taking place within the communities as well, as a new kind of Indian comes onto the continent and starts making kind of demands for things on the continent. I don't know where that's going to go, because the bigger fight right now is the Chinese on the continent, because the Chinese coming onto the continent has done several things, and that is that on one hand, they have built up things onto the continent. They've actually built things that people use, so people are very happy about it. On the other hand, they're sort of buying up all the resources as well, right? And so what's happening is that India and all these other countries are behind China, and they're trying to catch up. So there is like this proxy, war taking place, Cold War, with regards to which side are you on. And people are also waking up on the continent with regards to the Gandhi stuff as well. So I don't know if you know about this, but like in Accra, in Ghana, there was a Gandhi statue outside a university. And when people found out that Gandhi was actually had some racist views, or didn't really care about South African, the black majority in South Africa, then they felt like, what on earth are we doing with a Gandhi statue in Accra? And there's no deep relationship between Ghana and India. So they just planted a Gandhi statue on the campus. And so there's also awakening with regards to what India is doing. But, money is basically calling the shots.
Wrap it up. Why don't you wrap and I'll wrap?
We're gonna have one more question.
Oh,
One more.
Thank you for making this book and having some kind of a discussion. I was actually curious, do you feel that really popular celebrities like, say, Mindy Kaling, Priyanka Chopra, or say like people that are like the vice president are helping normalize this relationship between Israel and India and sort of this inevitable and very problematic alliance that is becoming a reality that's concealing sort of these issues that are quite harmful to Muslims and other minorities. Do you feel like they play a role in this sort of inevitable alliance that's occurring? And if so, how can we create a buzz? How can we press them to clarify their positions and to expose sort of maybe accidental or intentional ways that they're promoting certain alliances.
You want to say something? That's a very, very nice, very good question. And it speaks again to that point about discourse, right? You might remember that Priyanka Chopra was questioned at some event some years ago, and she was horrible in that response, in that exchange. And it really brought to light what is going on in India, but it also brought to light this aspiration that's on part of these Indian American as well, celebrities in the US, you know, trying to be as close as possible to all the beacons of power in the US, you know, whether it is Hollywood or it is being in a show about police in Hollywood, right? And so being very close to, you know, the military story, basically. And I think it goes back also to the question on caste as well. All of these shows that are coming out when Indian Americans are producing, they don't deal with these difficult issues, whether it is caste, whether it is Indian Muslims, whether it is Indian Christians. Everything is sort of reduced under, you know, everything is an upper caste story in the end, right? And that's what the Hindu nationalist lobby has also been able to do, is that they've been able to reduce or being able to come across as being representative of the whole community. So all these celebs are basically representing the whole community as well, and they allowing, or they sort of toying with American ignorance that basically puts all brown people in one category and have no idea that there's all of these divisions and also fissures between or inside the community. And that people are taking advantage of that. And so Priyanka Chopra is actually having the time of her life right now, because it's Indian Americans are absolutely on the ascendancy on the cultural front as well. And she's absolutely, like, you know, reaping the dividends right now. And in terms of pushing back on this, people need to call them out. People, if there's an event, people need to go and call them out. And I'm not too sure that Indian Americans, specifically Hindu Americans, upper caste Hindu Americans, are actually willing to take that risk. I don't think they are willing to do that yet, unfortunately, because also there's a difference between the Jewish American community and the Indian Hindu American community, in that the connection with the homeland is also a little different, right? And so Indian Americans are not willing also yet to cut India out. Whereas maybe Jewish Americans might be willing might be willing not to go to Israel, to go to Palestine. It's like, whatever, right? Indian Americans are not willing to do that yet, because there's a cost to pay, and I don't think people are willing to do that. And if you think about the caste again, and think about the class, upper class people don't make those sacrifices, right? And so, yes, absolutely. When it comes to these, I mean, there was an event recently where, you know, there was one Indian American actress whom I actually admire. I right now I'm so annoyed by her that I forgot her name, but I'm glad, because I don't want to say it anyway. She went to India for an event with the Ambanis, where the Ambanis created this this cultural center in Mumbai, and she's there, and the Ambanis are like, the Ambanis, the Adanis, the Tatas, these are all part of the economic arm of the fascist state. And so she has gone there and normalized it. Okay, and I think even one of the Hadid sisters went as well. So there's also this thing where people know, but they also don't know who's exactly involved. And I think part of that is pushing back when there's a chance to push back.
I also really want, I know we're out of time, but I really want to also kind of leaping off of that. I think it's very easy oftentimes to look at individuals and look at the role or guess the role they may or may not be playing and speculate about that. But I think it's also important to look at a lot of the platforms where we're seeing kind of the biggest push on very particular narratives, right? Netflix is one of the biggest examples where they have actually leaned in, you know, to borrow that popular framing, they've really leaned into two two groups, two countries where they know that they're going to be able, like they're getting so much content out of Israel. So if you go onto Netflix, I mean, I don't get Israeli content, but if you look for it, it's there. And there's tons of Israeli content, a lot of shows that even Netflix is remaking, or even, I mean, even HBO shows like Euphoria is obviously based off of an Israeli show as well. Sorry, ruined it. So we see that there's like this huge connection there, country by country as well. Even Last of Us, you guys. But then also, what is Netflix's other big audience? It's India, right? India is a country of over 1 billion people. It's a very juicy, incredible market for anyone. We know that Twitter years ago, I don't know if you guys remember this, Jack going to India, formerly of Twitter, going to India and hanging out with Modi. And like, that actually wasn't as big of a deal as it should have been. But it's because a lot of these platforms and the people who are, you know, the ones who are creating the algorithms, the ones who are creating the type of content that we're consuming and we're talking about. You know, Seema Auntie is a meme, but what is Seema Auntie representing? Seema Auntie is representing like upper caste, Gujarati, like Brahmin, you know, wedding, like really weird marriage systems that are not representative of most of the subcontinent, right? But these things, and of course we know that Netflix is also working with a lot of Indian producers and creating shows that are steeped in like narratives of securitization that are talking about Kashmir, about Islam, Muslims, etc. So it goes well beyond people like Mindy Kaling, who just wants a white man, right? It goes well beyond Priyanka Chopra, who can't sing. It goes well beyond our vice president, who doesn't, I don't know what she does, but it goes well beyond, you know, it goes well beyond individuals. And it's an issue that is far more structural, that is creating and feeding us narratives that we are like, this is nice, this is fun. I watch, you know, Indian matchmaking, much to my own chagrin, but like, I'm also very conscious of what is being fed to me. I think that ultimately is what it comes down to. You know, earlier someone asked like, well, what's the point, right? Like, if you're not going to go to the hill, like, what's the point? Who's the audience? I think ultimately comes down to also us being aware of what it is that we're constantly being fed. What are the narratives that are being sold to us? And then what are we expected to buy as well, right? What are we expected to believe? And I think this book really, truly does an incredible job of really showing us a very different reality than the one that we think that we live in. And even though you're like, what does Israel have to do with my life here? Well, you're in DC. It has a lot to do with our lives here and the way we understand everything, from whether the electoral processes in this country, whether it's like what the organizations we work for, the policies that we support or don't support, the Congress people we like hold up as progressive, right? I think this book really opens up and will open up a lot of eyes too, if you read it, to what those realities really are.
Thank you, Sana. Speaking of the book, we want to make sure there's enough time for Azad to sign whatever copies that are in this room. So, but I did want to take one more chance to thank him so much for sharing his knowledge with all of us.